The hotel room they don't rent out. The smell was the first thing they noticed. It pushed out of the bathroom vent like foul, sour air from a jar that had been sealed for years. Jessica raised her sleeve to her nose and took tiny breaths. Ryan tried to act calm, but his face said something else. He kept the door wide open as if fresh air could pull the stink away. The room felt heavy, like the air had weight. Jessica looked around and whispered, "Right, something is wrong here." The lamp threw a weak circle of light across the bedspread and the old wallpaper. The silence made the drip in the distance sound like a drum. Each drop hit, and the smell seemed to grow. They both stood still and listened, afraid to move closer, afraid not to. Jessica flipped the switch again. The lamp flickered twice and steadied on a dark, wet mark spreading across the ceiling. It grew slow but steady, like ink bleeding through paper. A single drop fell and made a new dark circle on the carpet. Then another. And another. It sounded like a clock counting down to something they didn't want to meet. Ryan slid a chair under the spot and climbed up with his phone light. He squinted, following the path of the leak. "It's from above us," he said, his voice uneven. The way the stain spread made Jessica's stomach twist. This didn't look like a small pipe problem. It looked like something old and wrong had been sitting there, waiting to fall through. The smell got worse, like hot metal and wet cloth. Jessica stepped into the hallway and pressed her back to the cool wall. She took a deep breath, but the stink followed her like a shadow. She didn't want to leave Ryan alone, but she needed air. Her head felt floaty, and her hands were cold even though the hallway was warm. Down the corridor, a small cart squeaked. An elderly maid pushed it slowly, towels stacked high, a tiny radio clipped to the handle. Jessica lifted a hand and called, "Excuse me, ma'am, is there a leak upstairs?" The maid's footsteps stopped. The radio hummed quietly. The corridor suddenly felt too long and too quiet. The maid's eyes traveled to the room number, 1412. Her face changed like a light turning off. She held the towel with both hands, knuckles white, and asked softly, "You're in 1412? Jessica nodded, a little surprised at the question. The maid leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "That room isn't supposed to be rented." She looked past Jessica at the open door and shivered. In the still air, her words felt heavy. Jessica wanted to ask, why, but her mouth felt dry. She turned as a deep creak groaned from inside the room, like wood giving up. The ceiling answered with a wet thump. Plaster cracked and gave way. The panel split like soft chalk. A brown wave splashed down, water, dust, and dark pieces of something Jessica couldn't name. A strand of hair slipped through the hole, slick and gray in the weak lamplight. It hung there and swayed. Ryan slipped off the chair and stumbled back. The air exploded with smell. Jessica froze as her brain tried to catch up to her eyes. The maid gasped behind her, a sound like a prayer breaking. Jessica wanted to run. She wanted to help. She wanted to be anywhere but here. A voice rolled down the empty hallway. It was deep, rough, and too close. "You shouldn't be in that room." Jessica spun around so fast the wall scraped her arm. The corridor was empty. No one stood there. The maid's cart was still. The radio was silent. Ryan whispered, "Jess, what's up there?" She couldn't answer. The ceiling creaked again. It sounded like weight shifting, like someone rolling over just above the plaster. The dripping sped up, and the smell thickened. Jessica swallowed hard. She felt watched, and not just from the hole. 2 days earlier, everything felt simple. Los Angeles sun, loud streets, and the bright idea to travel before graduation. A booking app had offered a deal, $39 a night. The hotel looked old but fine. "We'll barely be in the room," Ryan had said with a grin. They pulled their bags through the lobby and smiled at the old chandeliers and red carpet. It smelled like dust and old perfume, like a theater after a show. The desk clerk barely looked up. He typed, paused, then slid a key card across. 1412. "Top floor," he said. A woman behind the counter looked up sharply but kept quiet. Jessica noticed. She always noticed. The elevator groaned as it climbed. The floor numbers glowed a dim red, one after another. Jessica watched their reflections in the mirrored panel. The silver was scratched and cloudy, so their faces looked tired and stretched. "This place gives me the creeps," she said softly. Ryan laughed. "You watch too many horror movies." The doors opened to a long, dim hallway. The wallpaper peeled at the edges like old tape. Their room number was a little crooked, as if someone had tried to pull it off once. Jessica set the bags down. The key worked the first time. She told herself that meant good luck. She didn't believe it. That night felt normal enough. Pizza on the bed, an old movie on the laptop, shoes kicked under the chair. At midnight, Jessica went to brush her teeth and heard the pipes groan like a sleepy animal. Then she heard it, a slow, even dripping. She called out, "Ryan, do you hear that?" He paused the movie, listened, and shrugged. "Old building," he said, but the sound didn't stop. Pluck, pluck, pluck. Jessica stood there, toothbrush in hand, and watched the mirror light flicker once. She felt a little silly for being scared. She went to sleep with the sound still counting. Sometime after 3, Jessica woke up. The room was too quiet. The world felt off, like a dream. Then she heard it, faint scratching above the ceiling, like fingernails trying to write a secret no one should read. She held her breath. The sound moved a little, then paused, then moved again. Jessica touched Ryan's shoulder. "Did you hear that?" He rolled over and mumbled, "You're imagining things," and fell back to sleep. She stared up into the dark. The ceiling stared back, silent. She told herself she was fine, and finally, sleep pulled her under. Morning brought weak sun through the blinds and a bigger stain on the ceiling. It was the color of old tea, spread out like a map. Ryan took a photo and went downstairs. The clerk nodded without looking up. "Maintenance later," he said. Later never came. When Jessica returned from breakfast, the room felt stuffy. The stain had grown, and the smell had started. It wasn't strong yet, but it was wrong. She opened the window. The air outside was city warm, but inside the room, the cold felt deep. She stood under the stain and watched it grow. By evening, the lamp flickered every few seconds, and the smell had turned sharp. The drip sped up as if the ceiling had run out of patience. Jessica stood under it with her hand out like a kid catching rain. Ryan checked his phone, then frowned at the empty bars. The signal was bad. The room felt worse. Jessica said, "Something's wrong," and the words felt small. Ryan didn't answer. He watched the stain and she watched him. The silence hurt her ears. Somewhere, a pipe banged like a warning. They looked at each other and decided together without speaking, find the maid. Back in the room, the drip turned into a steady stream. Ryan tossed a towel under it, and the water spread out into the fabric. Jessica stared at the dark patch and reached toward it. The maid stood in the doorway with her hand on the frame, lips moving in a quiet prayer. Ryan touched the water and jerked back. "It's warm," he said, confused. Jessica felt her chest tighten. Warm water from the ceiling didn't make sense. The maid said, "You need to leave. Now." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were scared. Jessica had never seen fear look so sure. The ceiling moaned like old wood in a storm. A crack drew itself across the plaster, thin and fast. The whole center sagged. Jessica grabbed Ryan's arm. The light went out. In the dark, the rush of water roared, and something heavy dropped. Jessica stumbled for the door, but it jammed halfway. The smell hit like a wall. Ryan coughed and choked in the foul air. Cold, sticky water washed across Jessica's shoes. She turned on her phone light and aimed at the hole. The beam shook in her hand. She didn't want to see. She couldn't not look. The light found a shape in the mess above. A human hand hung through the torn ceiling. It was pale and swollen, fingers drooping, water sliding off in shiny lines. Jessica froze. Her mind went empty, like a light blinking out. The maid screamed from the hall, a sharp sound that bounced off the walls and made everything feel closer. Ryan pulled Jessica's arm, but she couldn't move. The sight would not let go of her. The hand didn't reach or wave. It just hung there, heavy and wrong, as if the ceiling was a thin lid to something worse. Jessica felt a cold wind brush her cheek though the window was closed. A small object clinked against the floor and slid to Jessica's shoe. She looked down. A black key, scratched and old, lay in the wet carpet. She bent and picked it up. The brass tag swung and flashed the words, "Roof access." It felt too cold in her hand, like it had been hiding in ice. She lifted her eyes to the hole. Something moved in the dark above, just a shift, just a shadow, but it felt like someone leaning in to watch her. The maid's voice shook. "Don't go up there." Jessica heard the warning and felt it press against her chest. But the key was heavy, and it was a door.